You just heard Scavenger of Human Sorrow. This is the Requiem Metal Podcast, and we're doing another death show.
There we are.
The Sound of Perseverance. I'm Mark.
And I am Jason. And we've done 3 previous death shows, kind of looking at the different eras, kind of the early brutal era, the kind of middle era where they begin to sort of explore their more technical roots, and then the later era with like individual thought patterns and symbolic, where they really kind of explore melodicism, technicality, and brutality, kind of all mixed together,
and really try to kind of distance themselves from death metal in a lot of ways.
Yeah, in a lot of ways. And this is the final statement, and we decided to explore this record, Sound of Perseverance, as a whole, because we felt, it's kind of it's the last statement from death, the last kind of real profound metal statement from Chuck Schuldiner, and it's all we have. And it's a record that merits its own kind of exploration.
Well, we have Control Denied, but musically it's interesting, but vocally...
Yeah, I need to listen. It's been years since I've listened to it. And
I just revisited it again.
Really?
And I revisited the... Relapse put out a double disc version that has... Or actually, there's a 3-disc version of it as well that has like original demos with Chuck doing singing.
Yeah.
But it's Chuck trying to sing.
Oh, and so it's not no good. Yeah.
Historically, it's interesting, but it's not... It doesn't hold up for me.
I mean, I guess it's maybe something you can look at, and I don't want to talk too much about Control Denied, but it's worth mentioning because it was recorded the same era.
Well, and actually, some of these songs were going to be for Control Denied, but the Nuclear Blast wanted them to fulfill a Final Death record, so they put a couple of them on.
So they threw it on there. Oh, that's interesting. I don't know if I even knew that.
I just read on Wikipedia.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, Wikipedia never lies. But I guess, I look at Control Denied as something I should try and listen to a little bit more, because it's sort of like Hendrix, and all the like B-sides and weirdo kind of things that have been put out since he's died. Like a lot of it holds up, some of it doesn't, but at least it's
I wish they would release it as an instrumental record.
Yeah.
Then I'd be interested in hearing it.
I wonder if we could, any way we could do that with like technology.
Now with
days?
my I don't have any really fantastic sound gear that I could scrub out vocals.
Yeah, that'd be neat.
Easiest way would be get a hold of the engineer and say, hey, send me that without the vocal track.
If anybody can get us a copy, we'll come up with some kind of prize for you. If you can get us an instrumental copy of Control Denied, that sounds pretty tight. But this was a pretty big record. I was telling Mark, for myself, this was a record that I kind of have memorized from start to finish. It's my favorite death. Even though I don't always pull it out as my death record that I listen to, I think I played it so much in its day that I almost don't need to listen to it as much anymore, because all the songs are pretty much memorized.
Well,
I know
came
where all
out
the
in
solos come.
1998, by the way.
98, yeah. And and we should talk about that for a second before we get into it, because Mark, you were kind of slightly out of the scene. This is right around that time where you were sort of like you were like a ninja, kind of. I
was being selective, and I wasn't really seeking out a ton of stuff.
Yeah. And Mark and I didn't really have much contact during this time period. I think this is right before Chris moved in with me, and it's about a year after I kind of started writing for Eclipse and started to kind of break my chops into how to be a metal journalist and all that. And in the Eclipse #2, I reviewed the record, and I went gaga for it. It was definitely my favorite record of '98, without a doubt, and I would go so far as to say it's the best pure metal record of the late '90s. Depending on how you want to define pure metal.
Well, what else was coming out in '98?
Wow, this is what we need to talk about for a second to set some historical context. And it's not just by default that it's the best record, but I think this was the time where we often refer to as the weird years of metal, when
it's kind of the tail of it. I think it's when because like 97, 98, 99. Those are I guess 97 kind of stands out to me a lot for all the peaceful stuff.
That's like the weirdest year.
But that was more experimentation. I think the later on stuff is just outright terrible. Like, Peter Tackern was doing Pain at this time. Everybody was like, well, death metal, maybe it's not going to last. Yeah. Let's see what else we can do.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, kind of, here comes Chuck blasting back with this record that was just... It was like metal to the core. It was bled metal in every way, and it wasn't afraid of the cliches. It wasn't afraid of the guitar solos. It wasn't afraid of like technicality.
It was being honest, and going to the production that Tom Morris was instrumental in this,
or Jim Morris, I think. Yeah, it's Jim Morris.
Tom Morris.
Is it Tom?
Tom.
Jesus, I suck.
I just did a little bit of research on Tom, right?
He's an engineer. Engineered by Jim Morris.
Was it recorded by Tom?
I don't know.
The Morris guys, the Morris sound. It was...
Controversy ensues. Requiem Metal Podcast.
For my money, it's one of the better sounding records to come out of Morris Sound, along with some of the Morbid Angel stuff. But at the time, everything was triggered drums, triggered everything, very spit and polished and like kind of lifeless. And this record sounds fantastic. It sounds analog. It's got a lot of breathing room in it.
Yep.
The drums sound fantastic. They don't sound like, I don't know of another like drum production except for like Enslaved Eld has this kind of vibe.
Yeah.
Where it sounds like it's a recorded live kit.
Yeah.
Which I love the sound of it.
And I mean, Scavenger of Human Sorrow is almost like, this showcase for Richard Christie. It's like introducing him to the world, because really he hadn't done much of anything of any kind of circumstance at this point.
Either had any of the other guys in the band.
Yeah, you got Shannon Hamm on guitar, and then Scott, I forget his name, Clendenin on bass,
which they've got like these like some credits on Metal Archives, but it's all they're bands that don't have links, and I've never heard of them at all. They're probably just locals or demo bands.
And I know Shannon Hamm and Christie went on to play with Control Denied, and then they threw Steve DiGiorgio in there on bass, and then Tim Aymar, I think was his name, was the vocalist on that whole Control Denied thing. But Richard Christie's he's a revelation in a way, because he's Haglund before, awesome.
Totally different style.
Great stuff.
Yeah.
And obviously the guy from Cynic on Human.
Right. Yeah.
And so Chuck has this tradition of just fantastic, great drummers and stuff. But I don't know if I've really ever heard anybody play like Richard Christie before. I mean, he's coming at it like left of center almost, the way he's doing stuff.
I mean, what it sounds like to me is somebody that played like fusion jazz, but then like is playing on a death metal record.
Yeah,
because it doesn't. Outside of like the double bass stuff, weird. He has all this weird cymbal stuff going around, and just not. It's not like fast for fast sake. It's just really complex, but it never like bogs you down like a Cradle of Filth technicality with just splash cymbals all the time. There's like a thoughtfulness, and it all kind of makes sense.
It's fairly organic,
Yeah, totally.
And it's the same, and it doesn't sound like him, but it's the same, I think, approach that like a guy like Brain Daler takes in like Mastodon or something.
Yeah,
where it's that whole organic, really molten, flowing sort of sound that's going on. And I made mention that Chuck almost has always, especially in these later records, Symbolic and Sound of Perseverance, has begun, as he embraces more and more melodicism, to sort of use his guitar in almost a volcanic quality, where it just is sort of like flowing out of him naturally. These solos compared to what the previous couple natural, records,
I think the solos are much more. I mean, they're basically his soul on. In music, they sound they're incredibly poignant. They're incredibly honest, and there's no like pretension to them at all. It's not like a Mike Amott solo where it sounds great, but it's like it's guitar masturbation.
Yeah, it's slicked up and stuff.
And these solos are completely just kind of like heartfelt, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned soul, and I mean, even though it's not like coming from the R&B sort of background that like a guy like Hendrix was coming from, but I mean, it's in the same ballpark in terms of the same approach a guy like Peter Green took in Fleetwood Mac or Hendrix took, where I'm not saying that he sounds like those guys at all, but in terms of the music was just a natural evolution coming out, as you said, of the soul.
I would even say Slash.
Yeah.
From Guns N' Roses. I think he's an incredible solo player. I don't think he's a great songwriter, but he's a great solo player.
I mean, he's like Keith Richards slicked up in a way, or not slicked up, but with a little more chops in terms of soloing. And that's what, say what you want about Keith Richards, but he knows how to write like real, honest, like raw riffs, this work.
Well, and Chuck on this record is picking his notes carefully too. They're not just a flurry of notes. It's all, if some of the like solos are just like a string bend. Yep. That holds out like a little bit too uncomfortably long, but it sounds awesome.
Yeah, and I wrote down in my notes that this is when somebody first tells me the term progressive metal, this is what I think of, not the pretentious Dream Theater kind of stuff, but it lacks that pretense that you hear in so much progressive metal. I mean, this is truly progressive. Let's put technicality, let's put melodicism, let's put aggression, let's put all these things together, but make them work naturally, not force anything to do something it's not supposed to be doing.
I was just listening to an Enslaved interview with Gritlow was talking. They asked him what he thought about the term progressive.
Yeah,
and he's like, I don't. When I hear progressive, I think of pushing forward, moving forward, not doing something like in the 70s or doing something like Dream Theater that's overly technical.
Yeah.
You know, it's just because I think that anytime you say progressive, it's a loaded term that people automatically think, oh, Genesis and Yes, great.
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, and I love like late 60s, early 70s stuff like Crimson, you know, but that was late 60s, early 70s, you know.
Yeah.
And it's okay to embrace the soul of that or the spirit of it, but to try and outright copy it and perfect it and re-perfect it and perfect it.
I mean, Opeth is always on a razor's edge of basically ripping off that stuff wholesale.
But they're very soulful. I mean, you feel like it's coming out of like Michael's kind of personality.
A little bit. I think some of the earlier stuff, I think it's just regurgitated.
Yeah.
I mean, it's good, but it's not. It's very. There's nothing really their own about it outside of putting death metal along with it.
Yeah, but
the newer stuff, I think he understands what it means now. But before, it felt like wholesale ripoff to me.
Sure,
which a lot of people might yell, but I'm like, you know.
But it still had its own quality because. I mean, I don't know. Nothing like that had been heard before, and so there's still like something really endearing about Orchid and Morning Rise.
Oh yeah, I like the records, but I just think they weren't really bringing anything new to the table outside of just genre mashup.
Hodgepodging things. Yeah, that I get. Yeah, I know what you're saying there. You know, I had an opportunity, and I'll come back to this a little bit more later because we want to get back into some music here in a second, but. One thing I'll kind of make mention is I got to do an interview with Chuck on this tour for Sound of Perseverance when they were touring with Hammerfall, and they played down at the IROC in Detroit, if any of you listeners were
Was that Glory to the Brave
show.
Era? Or is this for the second one?
No, this is the first record. So this is good. Yeah, so it was tolerable. You know, it was tolerable Hammerfall. But again, the tour that they were putting together was this idea of like, let's create a tour that's like utterly metal. Like, you know, and this is a time... For those of you younger listeners out there, this is a bad time to be a metalhead in America. I mean, this was when Korn and Limp Bizkit and Cold Chamber and all of that stuff was dominating. I mean, it was everywhere. It was you know, I was a freshman in college or sophomore in college, and just escaping the dorms, which was just inundated with this bullshit music, you know. And
Disturbed. And,
so I got a chance to interview Chuck, and here's the opening thing that Chuck said. And this is a good kind of way for us to go into Bite the Pain next. You know, he goes, I would like to do whatever I can to make sure that people know that fake bullshit new metal that people are calling metal is fucking garbage. It's not metal. It's okay if people want to like it. That's everyone's choice. But Cold Chamber, Korn, and all of these other bands are not metal, period. Metal is not about wearing a jogging suit on stage. It's about maintaining what metal is. Metal was never a fad. It has been injured in America by corporate America. So we're here with our new album, as well, I think, on behalf of Hammerfall, to further metal. We're fans of what we do, and I think we have a responsibility to the metal community. And you know, it's a bold statement in a sense, but it's he's absolutely right. And he wasn't afraid to wear metal all over himself. He wasn't following any fads or putting electronics into his music, which bands we like did, and that's fine, and I don't mind that stuff. But again, he's saying, what's the most uncool thing you can do in '98? Put out a fucking technical death metal, you know, technical melodic metal record, right in the face of everybody else. So. And with that, let's get back to some music. We got Bite the Pain, which has a really cool drum part that kind of kicks in about the 43-second mark or so. And then we're going to listen to Spirit Crusher and Story to Tell. And any thoughts on these songs? I mean, we'll talk a little more about it.
Spirit Crusher is probably my favorite vocal pattern. I wouldn't say I wouldn't say lyrics, but I think the vocal pattern is awesome in the
during
song.
The chorus, when he hits the Crusher. I mean, it's like some of the most brutal stuff.
It's like a pop hook, but it's scream.
Totally.
I think this record he's embracing more kind of like, for lack of a better word, I guess, pop or more traditional songwriting methods, but it works.
Yeah, and I think
they work for a reason.
He's embracing the same vocal kind of melodies and hooks and things that like Maiden did. And
totally, yeah.
I mean, I think he's elevating Death to the level of being that, you know. Define Iron Maiden to me. Well, I mean, they have progressive elements, they have, you know, punk elements, but they're just metal. They're just like, you know, the soul encompassment of metal. And I think Death became that on this record. Unfortunately, we never got to see what might have been beyond this, you know. So, but I think we can get into some good thoughts on Spirit Crusher and Story to Tell when we come back. So, enjoy Bite the Pain.
Look down at the strong will. From this I am the victor, son of the kill. I will not be your hunger. Instead, I fight the pain, looking not back but forward. And fight down. That's it.
Story to Tell, Spirit Crusher, and Bite the Pain.
Bite the Pain kind of sounds like a Priest song.
It does. And speaking of Judas Priest, we can mention it right now. One song we just don't have time to play because the whole album as a whole is like 56 minutes, and we like to kind of keep it to about 50 minutes or so. I'm sure we could have cheated and tried to squeeze it in somehow, but
I mean, we'll try to attach it to the end. But they did a pretty fantastic cover of Painkiller, and we'll see if we can either. Everybody that's listening to this podcast is crafty enough to go online and find the stuff too. Yeah. But we'll see what we can do to throw it on there as well.
And they recorded it as a Japanese bonus track, Painkiller, and basically the record label said, like they usually do when it comes to Japan, you need to give them something else, and so they went to the studio and basically improvised Painkiller, and the solos and some of the stuff in the song are fairly they're true to Priest, but they're also like kind of
it's not exactly
going off of it a little bit. They're kind of just playing around with it, and it's pretty fantastic, and the stuff Chuck does with his vocals is pretty phenomenal. I mean, it's a stretch for Chuck, definitely. And one thing about his vocals on this record is he's even pitched them higher than he's ever had before. I think he was starting to get strained a little bit with doing these type of death metal vocals, I think that's what drew him to Control Denied, was the opportunity to play music without having to like put out this sort of death metal vocal thing.
Well, I think that was the one area. I think he was kind of frustrated. That was the one area that he couldn't really like. What do you do? Yeah, with death metal, you're stuck with this kind of vocal performance, and if you can't, what can you really bring to it outside of? I guess he changed the whole kind of timbre of his voice, pitched it higher, but
and that's the only thing you can do, because he clearly, as you said from listening to those demo tracks, he didn't know how to sing clean. He can't pull a Vincent from Anathema off or Michael from Opeth. Or
but
something.
What he did do is, he added the way he pitched his vocals up almost like another I don't know if it's another octave, but into a kind of a higher area. It filled out the sound better instead of having more guttural, because the low tones are all filled up by the bass and by the stuff that Christie's doing on the drums.
And I think it adds a dynamicism too, because you can now hear his vocal lines a lot better. You can
make out every word
along with that.
Yeah, you can make out every word. You don't have to sit there and like with I guess Morbid Angel is easy to do too. But like when you first heard a Morbid Angel record as a kid,
it's kind of muddled because it's so deep.
You had to like actually follow the lyrics to know what he's saying. But this, you can pretty much kind of figure it out.
And there's a lot to be said about the lyrics. I'll give it up for Chuck for some of the stuff that's going on. And the song we just heard, Story to Tell in particular, I was telling Mark, I've had this running theory, and it's not really a great theory or anything, but,
Is it a crackpot theory?
It's a crackpot theory. We'll go with that. That there's a certain amount of vulnerability about life and mortality that you start to hear on Symbolic, with the song Symbolic and some of the other songs that are going on there, and especially here, Sound of Perseverance, and then later even with Control Denied. The fact that Control Denied, the record is called The Fragile Art of Existence. This is Sound of Perseverance. There's a song Story to Tell about kind of reflecting on life. There's almost this like subconscious like exploration of what's beyond and what your legacy is, and the kind of how you make it through like the struggles that life sort of puts before you. And of course, this is about a year out from where Chuck's going to be diagnosed with brain cancer, which is going to end his life. And whenever I hear this record, I hear that stuff in it, because I remember having it's weird, it's a strange story. I remember like when I lived in Italy, I didn't have a car, so I had walked everywhere, in my kind of hometown that I lived in this little medieval village. And I walked with my headphones and my Walkman all the time, and I brought like 30 CDs with me, because it's pre-iPod, pre-MP3, so...
Although that was I kind of envied how anytime you do the study abroad stuff, you'd be able to digest these albums much.
And this is one of them, and I absorbed the hell out of it. That I brought, Catatonia, Tonight's Decision, and Opeth, what was the same? It was put out at the same time as Tonight's Decision. Red Cover, Peaceville. My God, it's like my favorite Opeth. Face of Melinda, The More. Jesus Christ, I can't even remember.
Can't think.
Still Life. Jesus.
Still Life. Okay.
I'm an idiot. It's late. I taught all day. But and anyways, I remember like walking with headphones and just listening. And this is when I started to have this revelation. I started thinking about Chuck was sick at this point. He was still alive. But I was kind of
he went pretty quick.
Yeah. It was by 2001, I think he passed away. I mean, I feel bad. Maybe we should look that up before I make that proclamation. But
we'll double check over it in the next break. But no, the whole thing, even I think it's got a real a sad realization of mortality, and I think everybody kind of goes through, especially at certain stage of your life, you go through that. But this seemed much more like he's putting it all on the line because how much more is left.
Yeah, and he's not that old at this point. I mean, people have to understand he's like 33.
I thought he died at like 37.
And he may have, when he recorded this, like 98, I think he's like 34 or something. I remember he telling me in the interview, and it surprised me because I felt like, man, this guy's got a lot of records under his belt, and he's been doing, Mantis and Death since like 82, 83, you know. So he must have started that stuff when he was like 15, But story to tell. Besides just having some pretty incredible lyrics, also, I think for my money, the awesomest solo that Chuck ever wrote. I mean, it's the solo playing stuff that's happening there. It's him at his most melodic. I think the awesomest solo that ever Chuck plays is in the next song we're going to hear. But
he died December 13th, 2001, the age of 34.
So I told you he was young.
And especially since I'll be 36, that seems shit. I've got a fragile art of existence.
Yeah, well, you got to get like 8 or 9 records under your belt pretty quick here.
I'm recording demos for stuff right now. So.
There you go. Well, you got comic books. That's your artistic statement. But it is strange, to think of this guy by, diagnosed with cancer when he's 32 and he's dead by 34.
I don't know if there's something to the brainstem and headbanging.
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, Dio.
Tom Araya,
Oh, Dio was with stomach cancer, but...
Yeah, Tom Araya can't headbang anymore, but...
it's almost as worse than death.
Yeah, no doubt, especially for Tom. At least, no more synchronized headbanging.
I know.
The War Ensemble video. But I think what you heard there... The way that in Story to Tell, when he says tell it, and then it goes into this just like incredible 3-minute long elliptical solo that like him and Shannon Hamm are kind of intertwining. I mean, I just feel like it's, again, you said it's like a spiritual expression of like soul in a way, and I hate to get that weird and deep on I guess a death metal record as some people might perceive it, but I think this record's beyond that. It's not.
Yeah, I don't see any problem getting like that, pontificating like that when people would do it about a Marvin Gaye record.
No, absolutely.
I find just as much or more musical relevance in this.
But I think too, what's strange is and we joke about it, and I think it's the dirty secret about metal in some ways is that there's those revelations that you have, and maybe when we were doing the Grave show we had that revelation that there is sometimes a real lack of interest in death metal in putting time and energy into meaningful lyrics. It's
sometimes it doesn't matter.
And it doesn't.
A band like Grave, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and it's fine. It's part of the aesthetic. It's another instrument. But I think what Chuck really tried to do, especially starting probably back with Human and Spiritual Healing, we became more
Spiritual Healing, it's
socially conscious.
Yeah, it's all about
politics
and human rights
religion
issues
and things like that. But I think by the time you hit like Symbolic, I mean, he's like not even talking about anything that had anything to do with death metal hardly anymore.
No, even the song, the album titles.
Yeah.
Sound of Perseverance doesn't sound like...
It sounds triumphant, but not in like a cheesy Manowar way or something.
It sounds like a Priest or like a Maiden song.
Yeah.
Like that could easily be that. But or Symbolic, I guess Symbolic, you could go either way. But
and he's talking about things like Scavenger Human Sorrow and Bite the Pain. He's talking about the things that you go through in your encounters with human beings in life. I mean, Scavenger Human Sorrow is like him basically calling out anyone that preys on people's essentially their sorrow and like the
insecurities,
and Chuck's a guy who's always been kind of controversial, and I even addressed that in the interview with him where he kind of had to dispel the idea that he's like, I hate to put it to you, but me and Gene Hoglan are still really good friends. There's no juicy story there because it seems like everybody was always trying to attach this reputation to Chuck that he was some kind of like ludicrous asshole who was like a mad scientist and always kicking everybody out of the band. But he had a vision and he went with it.
Well, it's to his credit, I mean, some people are just assholes, but it was his band. He was the one that wrote all the music. Yeah. If somebody's not on for the ride, kick them out. Why the hell would they stay around?
Yeah. Yeah.
And really, I don't think he's had the same lineup on 2 records.
I think the closest you get is Spiritual Healing and Leprosy. But even Spiritual Healing, he adds Murphy. So it wasn't technically, but you had Butler and
Andrews.
Yeah, Bill Andrews. Yeah. So. I don't know. I mean, I just think, if you allow yourself to the opportunity and you haven't really put time into listening to this record, listen to it from a different angle. Don't listen to it like you would a death metal record. Listen to it like you would, like, a Marvin Gaye record or a Bob Dylan record or something. I'm not comparing them to Bob Dylan in any kind of way, but it's a more meaningful listen than maybe I think what people initially were expecting. And I think he dropped that in the middle of a very unmeaningful time in music
which probably is why it didn't resonate quite so much at the time.
And he's and in a lot of ways, I think a lot of people saw this as a comeback record. I know you probably did, and I kind of did, because Symbolic, like, the echo chamber on Symbolic was like 5 feet. Like it didn't go anywhere. It just was
I liked it, but
thud.
Yeah.
Roadrunner was in the process of converting to being a shitty new metal label, essentially.
Well, that's when like Goo Goo Dolls was doing like gangbusters for him.
Yeah, well, and I mean,
or was that Metal Blade?
That was Metal Blade, was Goo Goo Dolls, but Roadrunner was getting on board with the Slipknots and the Coal Chambers and all that bullshit. Yeah. And that's fine, whatever. Roadrunner's got to run their business, and Monty Connor is going to do his thing or whatever, but. Again, I think it's just odd. You hear it now, and we're in like the midst of, I guess, a renaissance of metal the last 5-10 years or whatever, and so it doesn't sound that oddball. But when you think that like everything that was really happening in almost a mainstream sense was like Korn, Limp Bizkit, new metal, destruction.
Put it in context, yeah, it definitely stands out more.
Even Metallica was doing like simplistic, stripping their sounds down. Megadeth
is this around Load time or?
Maybe a little bit after Load.
Well, speaking real quickly of a story to tell, there's almost like a riff that should have been on Injustice.
Yeah.
Dun-dun-dun-dun-dun.
Yep. I remember Mark pointed that out. I had never noticed that before, as much as I've listened to this record. But it's weird to think that something this melodic came out. I mean, even Slayer was kind of off their game. With Diablos, which was put out in '98. It was not a great year for a lot of metal stuff, and this kind of rises to the top for that reason. But I don't know. And Mark mentioned some of the songs we listened to before, like Spirit Crusher with its great vocal lines and stuff going on there. I don't know. I can't say enough good things about this record. I really like it.
Thank you, Mr. Hundy. Next.
But anyways, let's get back into some music. We've got a long player up here, Flesh and the Power It Holds. I do believe maybe the longest song Death ever wrote.
What's the time on it?
8:26.
I think you're right.
Spiritual Healing, I think, was pushing it, though, the title track.
But it's repetitive.
Song. Yeah. This is... follow this song. This is progressive metal. This is what progressive metal needs to be. It dances and moves, and it just flows. It has just this
it pushes the genre forward,
And when some of the staccato palm mute kind of stuff that like happens, I mean, it's got like a groove to it that's cool. And I accidentally brought up the term jazzy to Chuck, and Chuck goes on this big tirade about, I don't own any Atheist records. I don't know why everyone always compares us to Atheists and calls us jazzy and stuff. So I think Chuck just naturally writes different kinds of music, and it just comes out of his pores, and it is what it is.
Well, and really, all the jazz really means, I guess, if you take it really down to the root, isn't it kind of like playing unconventional time signatures?
Yeah, on some level.
I mean, pull out those kind of elements. That's not necessarily something you have to use a saxophone to play.
No,
or you have to listen to a Cecil Taylor.
You don't have to listen to Miles Davis for 10 years to be able to play good, warm, analog technical music. So. But so we're going to get into Flesh and the Power It Holds. And like I said, I think this might be the peak of Chuck's guitar playing. It might be like his greatest statement with that particular instrument. And then it'll move into an instrumental song, Voice of the Soul, which I really think fits into the solo you'll hear in this opening tune, Flesh and the Power It Holds. But that's up to you to
That almost is like a Thulsa Doom kind of thing.
Yeah.
The Riddle of Steel, the power of flesh.
Yes.
See, that's pretty metal.
That is pretty metal. I like that. And then we'll kind of come out with to forgive is to suffer. Forgive is to suffer, voice of the soul, and flesh and the power it holds. And like we said, the voice of the soul tune was interesting because it was I guess an acoustic instrumental. With obviously electric guitar kind of mixed in and stuff. I asked Chuck about that, and he said basically it was a song in the works since Symbolic, and he kind of just wanted to try something that was non-typical for like a guitar instrumental on a death metal record. Without kind of just showing off like leads and
or it's not just classical guitar.
Yeah, exactly. It's like taking you would hear on a death metal record sometimes like acoustic passages or something like that, and he's kind of playing with it and throwing an electric lead over top of it and making it still metallic in a way, but this goes back to your comment earlier. It's called Voice of a Soul, you know, and it's kind of all there. And then obviously the epic Flesh and the Power it holds, which we kind of like talked about a little bit before. To Forgive is to Suffer, as mentioned, has that kind of Lynchian, like kind of 80s metal hero kind of part at the end and stuff.
Which I don't have, because I don't see anything wrong with that either.
No, and I'm sure on some level Chuck probably respected what those guys did. It was lyrically and vocally pretty probably empty. The rest of the music
their image and everything else.
I can't see Chuck as a Hairspray kind of guy.
Well, I think this was when George Lynch was like pumping up too.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe. Yeah.
And later on, he'd go to say that he was pumped up so big he could it made him suffer how he could actually play because his arms are too damn big to pick well.
I could see that. And one thing I mentioned to Mark that was always really cool about seeing Chuck, and I fortunately I got to see him twice on this tour. I got to see him at the Metal Fest, which was the one you skipped, I do believe. I got to see him the Metal Fest that summer, and they didn't play any songs off this record, but what it did is it got me really pumped and excited for this new Death record. And so I remember bugging Chris like, hey, when you get that Death promo, I want to review it. When you get this Death promo, I want to review it. And it was like I was building up to this record before I even heard it, and then it felt like the right record at the right moment, the
only time I saw him was Symbolic.
And that would have been a cool.
Or no, it wasn't Symbolic. It was Individual Thought Patterns. Yeah, it was a good time.
That's still pretty cool. I wouldn't mind seeing Death in every era. You know, that's the neat part about them. There's never a bad record that they make or a bad era or sound that they kind of create. But and then I saw them obviously with Hammerfall. So. But one thing I noticed, and it was like the way that the guitar looked, and you said that Chuck plays it up higher anyways than your average guitar player. But
which a lot of people make fun. Look at how Geddy Lee plays bass. And stuff. Watch what was the hell was the
I Love You Man.
Yeah.
That's the bass. Yeah,
that's really it seems like the more technical you get, the higher your guitar goes.
Yeah, the way Chuck played was the way, like when I watch, and I've been teaching this rock and roll history class, so I know I keep making Hendrix references, but we watch a lot of footage of how the guitar looked in his hands and how small it always looked because he had just total mastery over it, and his hands and his fingers were like fluidly moving. But it wasn't like a flurry of notes either. It was all very like tasteful and organic, and
it's like he knew the thing, and it's like as part of his own body.
And the appendage thing that I kind of mentioned, but so that's kind of I guess some of my final thoughts on this record in some ways, and I guess I'll read one last quote before we kind of wrap things up here about I asked Chuck what inspires him every day. He says, the whole idea of creating to me is awesome. When you can create something that will bring you enjoyment to yourself and other people, that's a really cool feeling, almost like a release. I just enjoy it. It's in my blood, it's in my heart, it's something I have to do. And I know you feel that way and
exactly.
What you do as an artist and stuff, but
I was listening to NPR today, and I heard a really good quote by, what the hell is her name? I don't really care for her music at all, but I'd never heard it said so succinctly before. Is it JT Tungsdale or Kungsdale? She's some singer-songwriter from...
Oh, I know who you're talking
about. From UK or something.
I don't know her, though, but...
But they was asking her the typical inspiration question, and she's like, I try to impress myself every record. Yeah. Like, that totally makes sense. I try to outdo myself, but not just to outdo for the sake of outdoing, but you want to honestly like stand back and like, that's pretty damn good.
Yeah. And I think there's few artists that have ever graced metal or maybe any genre of music who could say that what Chuck said, in that every record there was an evolution that was positive. There was never a negative evolution that I ever saw on any Death record. He was always forward thinking. He was always extending everything he was trying to do and making more of it without
jumping the gun,
or shoving too much down anybody's throat. And I mean, for making a final statement with Sound of Perseverance, this is a hell of a way to go out for a guy like Chuck.
Oh yeah.
And so historically, he needs to he's revered for all the right reasons. He's not somebody that became popular simply because he died. It's just an unfortunate side effect of what he already was known to people at the time. Well,
unfortunately, like metal journalism and I guess just general acceptance, internet, none of that stuff was quite as big as it is now, where we actually have, you go to my bookshelf and I've got a book about Swedish death metal and punk and Celtic Frost and all this other stuff. And I think if he would have been around today, I mean, I think he could be a huge mouthpiece for all this stuff.
And I do remember, though, when he died, and I felt like this was like some kind of weird comeuppance, but I remember on MTV News there were specials on him dying of cancer and like all that stuff. Yeah, and it was the most bizarre thing because I couldn't figure out why. Like, why suddenly they gave a shit about somebody that they had just kind of more or less abandoned.
I didn't even realize that was my TV blackout phase. So.
Yeah. And I mean, and give credit where credit's due. At least, like, somebody at that network realized this is probably something that's important and we need to, like, it might not be our cup of tea, but we should throw it out there.
You can't say death metal without saying death.
Yeah, no, and I mean, he's the godfather.
I'm not trying to make a stupid pun, but, he's one of the bands.
Yep. So, it's what it is, and we're gonna end with a moment of clarity, which is just kind of a nice way. And this is actually the way that the record was intended to be ended before they tacked on Painkiller. So it's I guess an appropriate way to sort of go out and I don't know. Anyways, let us know what your thoughts are on death. I'm sure everybody has like a kind of a favorite moment or a favorite story on the band. We're kind of putting the band to rest. And I just saw one pull quote that Chris pulled out here where he says, "We're out here playing metal, letting people know that real metal is still alive and that you can't kill something that's sincere. All this corporate crap, it's almost like it pooped out of a factory. It's fake and artificial. This is real. That's fake." And that's Chuck in a nutshell. He was intensely passionate about what he did, and that got him in trouble. A lot of people didn't like him for that. And I, as a teacher who often gets in trouble because I shove my very vocal opinions in the face of staff members, and I'm not liked by certain people. Hey, I can respect.
Well, recent middle school
that.
Coach of the Year now too.
Oh,
Teacher of the Year, and man,
you're
pushing it.
I'm pretty much a celebrity around these parts. And local death metal aficionado. That's my other claim to fame. So, but anyways, so let us know what your thoughts are. Shoot us an email at requiempodcast@gmail.com. Check us out on iTunes. Leave a comment. Facebook.
Check us out on Facebook. And also, if you'd like to help the show out, we would love donations because we've got a lot of costs that we accrue every year.
That we do.
And any donations we've got in the past have been greatly appreciated and have gone out to shipping, the packages for the contests and web hosting, all that. So any little pittance that you think, it's like putting $5 in the tip jar or something if you enjoy what you had at the the Requiem coffee shop.
There you go. Yeah.
We'd greatly appreciate that. That's all right on the requiempodcast.com.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so check out the site. Leave us some comments, give us some feedback, and get ready for next time when we might be heading north of the border.
Yes.
Soon. So, but
we are in the United States, just so that give you a hint where we might be going.
All right. Well, enjoy Moment of Clarity. I'm Jason.
And I'm Mark.